Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Insurgent Mexico. We'll be picking up today with Chapter 3 and reading through a bit here. Let me take a quick look. 3's pretty short. 4, my fingers can separate pages. 4 is not too bad, so. Okay, but let's hop into this. Chapter 3, First Blood. The water train pulled out first. I rode on the cowcatcher of the engine, which was already occupied by the permanent home of 2 women and 5 children. They had built a little fire of mesquite twigs on the narrow iron platform and were baking tortillas there. Over their head, against the windy roar of the boiler, fluttered a little line of wash. It was a brilliant day, hot sunshine alternating with big white clouds. In 2 thick columns, one on each side of the train, the army was already moving south. As far as the eye could reach, a mighty double cloud of dust floated over them, and little straggling groups of mounted men jogged along, with every now and then a big Mexican flag. Between slowly moved the trains, the pillars of black smoke from their engines, at regular intervals, growing smaller until over the northern horizon only a dirty mist appeared. I went down into the caboose to get a drink of water, and there I found the conductor of the train lying in this bunk reading the Bible. He was so interested and amused that he didn't notice me for a minute. When he did, he cried delightedly, "Oiga! I have found a great story about a chap called Samson, who was muy hombre, a good deal of a man, and his woman. She was a Spaniard, I guess, from the mean trick she played on him. He started out being a good revolutionist, a maderista, and she made him a pelon. Pelon means literally cropped head, and is the slang form for a federal soldier because of the federal army is largely recruited from prisons. Our advance guard with a telegraph field operator had gone on to Conejos the night before, and they met with the train in great excitement. The first blood of the campaign had been spilt. A few Colorados scouting northward from Bermejillo had been surprised and killed just behind the shoulder of the big mountain which lies to the east. The telegrapher also had news. He had again tapped the federal wire and sent the federal commander in Torreon signing the dead captain's name and asking for orders, since a large force of rebels seemed to be approaching from the north. General Velasco replied that the captain should hold Conejos and throw out outposts to the north to try to discover how large the force was. At the same time, the telegrapher had heard a message from Argumindo in command at Mapimi, saying that the entire north of Mexico was coming down on Torreon rather than the Gringo army. Conejos was just like Yermo, except that there was no water tank. 1,000 men with white-bearded old General Rosalio Hernandez riding ahead went out almost at once, and the repair train followed them a few miles to a place where the Federals had burned 2 railroad bridges a few months before. Out beyond that last little bivouac of the immense army spread around us, the desert slept silently in the heat waves. There was no wind. The men gathered with their women on the flat cars. Guitars came out. And all night hundreds of singing voices came from the trains. The next morning I went to see Villa in his car. This was a red caboose with chintz curtains on the windows, the famous little caboose which Villa had used in all his journeys since the fall of Juarez. It was divided by partitions into two rooms, the kitchen and the general's bedroom. This tiny room, 10 by 20 feet, was the heart of the Constitutionalist army. There were held all the councils of war, and there was scarcely room enough for the 15 generals who met there. In these councils, the vital, immediate questions of the campaign were discussed. The generals decided what was to be done, and then Villa gave his orders to suit himself. It was painted a dirty gray. On the walls were tacked photographs of showy ladies in theatrical poses, a large picture of Carranza, one of Fierro, and a picture of Villa himself. Two double-width wooden bunks folded up against the wall, in one of which Villa and General Angeles slept, and in the other Jose Rodriguez and the Dr. Rashbaum, Villa's personal physician. That was all. "Que desea, amigo? What do you want?" said Villa, sitting on the end of the bunk in blue underclothes. The troopers who lounged around the place lazily made way for me. "I want a horse, mi general." "Caray, our friend, he wants a horse?" grinned Villa sarcastically amid a burst of laughter from the others. "Why, you correspondents will be wanting an automobile next. Oiga, senor reporter, do you know that about 1,000 men in my army have no horses? Here's the train. What do you want a horse for? So I can ride with the advance." "No," he smiled. "There are too many balazos, too many bullets flying in the advance." He was hurrying into his clothes as he talked and gulping coffee from the side of a dirty tin coffee pot. Somebody handed him his gold-handled sword. "No," he said contemptuously. "This is to be a fight, not a parade. Give me my rifle." He stood at the door of his caboose for a moment, thoughtfully looking at the long lines of mounted men, picturesque in their crossed cartridge belts and varied equipment. Then he gave a few quick orders and mounted his big stallion. "Vamonos!" cried Villa. The bugles brayed, and a subdued silver clicking sounded a subdued silver clicking ringing sounded as the companies wheeled and trotted southward in the dust, and so the army disappeared. During the day we thought we heard cannonading from the southwest, where Urbina was reported to be coming down in the mountains to attack Mapimi. And late in the afternoon, news came of the capture of Bernajillo, and a courier from Benavides said that he had taken Tlahualilo. We were in a fever of impatience to be off. About sundown, Senor Calzado remarked that the repair train would leave in an hour, so I grabbed a blanket and walked a mile up the line of trains to it. Chapter 4. On the Cannon Car. The first car of the repair train was a steel-encased flat car upon which was mounted the famous constitutionalist cannon El Niño, with an open caisson full of shells behind it. Behind that was an armored car full of soldiers, then a car of steel rails, and 4 loaded with railroad ties. The engine came next. The engineer and fireman hung with cartridge belts, their rifles handy. Then followed 2 or 3 boxcars full of soldiers and their women. It was a dangerous business. A large force of Federals were known to be in Mapimi, and the country swarmed with their outposts. Our army was already far ahead, except for 500 men who guarded the trains at Conejos. If the enemy could capture or wreck the repair train, the army would be cut off without water, food, or ammunition. In the darkness, we moved out. I sat upon the breech of El Niño, chatting with Captain Diaz, the commander of the gun, as he oiled the breech lock of his beloved cannon and curled his vertical mustachios. In the armored recess behind the gun, where the captain slept, I heard a curious, subdued rustling noise. "What's that?" "Eh?" cried he nervously. "Oh, nothing. Just then there emerged a young Indian girl with a bottle in her hand. She couldn't have been more than 17. Very lovely. The captain shot a glance at me and suddenly whirled around. "What are you doing here?" he cried furiously to her. "Why are you coming out here?" "I thought you said you wanted a drink," she began. I perceived that I was one too many and excused myself. They hardly noticed me. But as I was climbing over the back of the car, I couldn't help stopping and listening. They had gone back to the recess and she was weeping. "Didn't I tell you," stormed the captain, "not to show yourself when there are strangers here? I will not have every man in Mexico looking at you." I stood on the roof of the rocking steel car as we nosed slowly along. Lying on their bellies on the extreme front platform, 2 men with lanterns examined each foot of the track for wires that might mean mines planted under us. Beneath my feet, the soldiers and their women were having dinner around fires built on the floor. Smoke and laughter poured out of the loopholes. There were other fires aft, brown-faced, ragged people squatting at them in the car tops. Ahead, the sky blazed stars without a cloud. It was cold. After an hour of riding, we came to a piece of broken track. The train stopped with a jar and the engine whistled, and a score of torches and lanterns jerked past. Men came running. The flares clustered, bobbing together as the foreman examined the damage. A fire sprang up in the brush and then another. Soldiers of the train guard straggled by, dragging their rifles, and formed impenetrable walls around the fires. Iron tools clanged, and the wah-hoy of men shoving rails off the flat car. A Chinese dragon of workmen passed with a rail on their shoulders, then others with ties. 400 men swarmed upon the broken spot, working with extraordinary energy and good humor until the shouts of gangs setting rails and ties and the rattle of the sledges on spikes made a continuous roar. It was an old destruction, probably a year old, made when these same constitutionalists were retreating north in the face of Mercado's federal army, and he had it all fixed in an hour. Then on again, Sometimes it was a bridge burned out, sometimes 100 yards of track twisted into grapevines by a chain and a backing engine. We advanced slowly at one big bridge that it would take 2 hours to prepare. I built myself a little fire in order to get warm. Calzado came past and held me. "We've got a handcar up ahead," he said, "and we're going down and see the dead men. Want to come?" "What dead men?" "Why, this morning an outpost of 80 rurales was sent scouting north from Bermejo. We heard about it over the wire and informed Benavidez on the left. He sent a troop to take them in the rear and drove them north in a running fight for 15 miles until they smashed up against our main body and not one got out alive. They've scattered along the whole way just where they fell." In a moment, we were speeding south on the handcar. At our right hand and left strode two silent, shadowy figures on horseback, cavalry guards, with rifles ready under their arms. Soon the flares and fires of the train were left behind, and we were enveloped and smothered in the vast silence of the desert. "Yes," said Calzado, "the rurales are brave. They are muy hombres. Rurales are the best fighters Diaz and Huerta ever had. They never desert to the revolution. They always remain loyal to the established government because they are police." It was bitter cold. None of us talked much. "We go ahead of the train at night," said the soldier at my left, "so that if there are any dynamite bombs underneath, we could discover them and dig them out and put water in them." "Caramba," said another sarcastically. The rest laughed. I began to think of that, and it made me shiver. The dead silence of the desert seemed an expectant hush. One couldn't see 10 feet from the track. "Oiga!" shouted one of the horsemen. It was just here that one lay. The brakes ground and we tumbled off and down the steep embankment, our lanterns jerking ahead. Something lay huddled around the foot of the telegraph pole. Something infinitely small and shabby, like a pile of old clothes. The rurale was on his back, twisted sideways from his hips. He had been stripped of everything of value by the 30 rebels, shoes, hat, underclothing, and they left his ragged jacket with the tarnished silver braid because there were 7 bullet holes in it, and his trousers soaked with blood. He had evidently been much bigger when alive. The dead shrink so. A wild red beard made the pallor of his face grotesque until you noticed that under it, and the dirt and the long lines of sweat of his terrible fight and hard riding, his mouth was gently and serenely open as if he slept. His brains had been blown out. "Caray!" said one guard. "There was a shot for the dirty goat, right through the head." The others laughed. "Why, you don't think they shot him there in the fight, do you, pendejo?" cried his companion. "No, they always go around and make sure afterward." "Hurry up! I've found the other," shouted a voice off in the darkness. We could reconstruct this man's last struggle. He had dropped off his horse, wounded, for there was blood on the ground, into the little dry arroyo. We could even see where his horse had stood while he pumped shells into his Mauser with feverish hands and blazed away, first to the rear where the pursuers came running with Indian yells, and then at the hundreds and hundreds of bloodthirsty horsemen pouring down from the north with the demon Pancho Villa at their head. He must have fought a long time, perhaps until they ringed him round with living flame, for we found hundreds of empty cartridges, and then, when the last shot was spent, he made a dash eastward, hit at every step, hid for a moment under the little railroad bridge, and ran out upon the open desert, where he fell. There were 20 bullet holes in him. They had stripped him of all save his underclothes. He lay sprawled in an attitude of desperate action, muscles tense, one fist clenched and spread across the dust as if he were dealing a blow. The fiercest exultant grin on his face, strong, savage, until one looked closer and saw the subtle touch of weakness that death stamps on life, the delicate expression of idiocy over it all. They had shot him through the head 3 times. How exasperated they must have been. Crawling south through the cold night once more, a few miles, and then a bridge dynamited or a strip of track wrecked. To stop the dancing torches and great bonfires leaping up from the desert, and the 400 wild men pouring furiously out of the falling upon their work. Villa had given orders to hurry. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I came upon the soldieras squatting around a fire, and asked them if they could give me tortillas and coffee. One was an old gray-haired Indian woman with a perpetual grin, the other a slight girl not more than 20 years old, who was nursing a 4-month baby at her breast. They were perched at the extreme tip of the flat car, their fire built upon a pile of sand, and the train jolted and swayed along. Around them, back against them, feet sticking out between them, was a great conglomerate mass of sleeping, snoring humans. The rest of the train was by this time dark. This was the only patch of light and warmth in the night. As I munched my tortilla and the old woman lifted a burning coal in her fingers to light her cornhusk cigarette, wondering where her Pablo's brigade was this night, and the girl nursed her child, crooning to it, her blue enameled earrings twinkling, we talked. "Ah, it is a life for us, viejas," said the girl. "Adios, but we follow our men out in the campaign, and then do not know from hour to hour whether they live or die. I remember well when Philadelphia called to me one morning in the little morning before it was light. We lived in Pachuca, and said, 'Come, we are going out to fight because the good Pancho Madero has been murdered this day.' We had only been loving each other 8 months too, and this first baby was not born. We had all believed that peace was in Mexico for good. Philadelphia saddled the burro, and we rode out through the streets just as light was coming, and into the fields where the farmers were not yet at work. And I said, 'Why must I come?' And he answered, 'Shall I starve then? Who shall make my tortillas for me but my woman?' It took us 3 months to get north, And I was sick, and the baby was born in a desert just like this place, and died there because we could not get water. That was when Villa was going north after he had taken Torreon. The old woman broke in. Yes, and all that is true. When we go so far and suffer so much for our men, we are cruelly treated by the stupid animals of generals. I am from San Luis Potosi, and my man was in the artillery of the Federacion when Mercado came north. All the way to Chihuahua we traveled, the old fool of a Mercado grumbling about transporting the viejas. And then he ordered his army to go north and attack Villa and Juarez, and he forbade the women to go. Is that the way you're going to do, desgraciado? I said to myself. And then he evacuated Chihuahua and ran away with my man to Ojinaga. I just stayed right in Chihuahua and got a man in the Maderista army when it came in. A nice, handsome young fellow, too. Much better than one. I'm not a woman to stand being put upon. How much are the tortillas and coffee? I asked. They looked at each other, startled. Evidently, they had thought me one of the penniless soldiers crowded in on the train. What you would like, said the young woman faintly. I give them a peso. The old woman exploded in a torrent of prayer. God is sainted, Mother. The blessed Nino and Our Lady of Guadalupe have sent this stranger to us tonight. Here we had not a centavo to buy coffee and flour with. I suddenly noticed that the light of our fire had paled and looked up in amazement to find it was dawn. Just then a man came running along the train from up front, shouting something unintelligible, while laughter and shouts burst in his wake. The sleepers raised their curious heads and wanted to know what was the matter. In a moment, our inanimate car was alive. The man passed, still yelling something about Padre, his face exultant with some tremendous joke. What is it? I asked. Oh, cried the old woman. His woman on the car ahead has just had a baby. Just in front of us lay Bermejo. Its pink and blue and white plastered adobe houses, as delicate and ethereal as a village of porcelain. To the east, across a still dustless desert, a little file of sharp-cut horsemen with a red, white, and green flag over them were riding into town. But yeah, that ends that episode, that chapter, so we'll end it there. But yeah, we see more life on the train as our reporter rides on through. You know, even though it's a war going on, all this battle going on, everyday life must continue. So, you know, in the one chapter, the captain is apparently having a bit of a something with this 17-year-old. And he's like, I do not need the other men looking at you. Because they talked about before in the book how some of the Mexican men were very jealous of other guys looking at their women. So, but yeah. And then in the other chapter, you have the women making just living their life. They've had kids. The young woman is nursing her young child, and the older woman is making the food and everything. She's making tortillas and has the coffee and. But yeah, then that one guy takes off running along the train. He's like, they hear him yell "Padre," which of course is Spanish for father, and they confirm it later on. It says his wife had just had a baby. He's like, I'm a father. Oh, God. But yeah. So even under all this condition of death and destruction, having to refix the rails of the train, life is still going on. It's not all kill or be killed. There is still things that must be done. So yeah, it gives a nice glimpse of that, as you know, all around them there's still a war being fought. I love that the younger woman, she's like, I had a man, but I was prevented from traveling with him. Or it may have been the older woman. But anyway, one of them says, I had a man, he was a federale, we had a relationship, but then the federal generals came calling and took him and said I could not travel with him, so I just stayed, hooked up with a motorista when they came in, and I've been traveling with them since. You gotta give your woman some attention, fellas. This is just a fact. There is a minimum you must do. But anyway, yeah. That'll be the end of that episode. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.